right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you for joining us today for this DZone Fireside Chat, the future of secrets management, sponsored by Doppler. I'm Jesse, Chief Technologist here at DZone, and I'm thrilled to be here today to deep dive into a topic that's becoming increasingly crucial in our evolving DevOps and security landscape, secrets management. As the strategies for protecting API keys, database credentials, and secrets are evolving, we're excited to explore how the future of secrets management is shaping up, with a focus on innovation, compliance, identity-based authentication, and of course, we're going to get to some AI. It's my great pleasure, though, first to introduce our guests. With us today, we have Brian Villalunga. Wave, Brian, founder and CEO of Doppler. The first secrets management platform for developers. Thanks for being here, Brian. Also featured in the Forbes 30 Under 30, come on, and even spent some time working at Uber, working on overall safety. So you've been in the space for a little while. You might know what you're talking about, right? We've got Nick Manugan, who began his journey at Doppler as an early engineer, but now you're head of engineering and leading a team dedicated to improving the developer experience with some really cool security tools. And last but certainly not least, Hamza Sharif, the head of solutions engineering at Doppler, who brings a lot of experience from your previous role at HashiCorp, working with Vault and other large enterprise customers. We have a great group. Thanks for joining us, guys. All right, with such a rich background in secrets management, these guys have unique perspectives. They're going to take us through a whole bunch of stuff and teach us some really good current trends and things that you'll be able to apply to improve your secrets management where you are. But before we get started, I wanted to let you all know we are 100% live. This is not pre-recorded, so we'd love to have your participation. If you look over on the side of your screen, you should see a chat window. And if you have any questions or comments, just participate, say hello, tell us where you're from. And then as we get towards the end of our talk today, you'll be able to put things in the Q&A. So pay attention over there and please do participate. So, all right, let's kick things off. I want to know first, what do you think has been the most significant shift in trends in this space and why?
Brian, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest trends that we're seeing right now is when Doppler was started many years ago, about 5-6 years ago, secrets management was often considered just a security tool. And so it was primarily purchased by security teams and then only used by security teams and sometimes forced upon developers. And really what we're seeing over time is that it's becoming more and more of not just a security tool, but a DevOps tool for orchestrating secrets within your infrastructure, and also a developer tool used for syncing secrets in local development. And oftentimes developers see Doppler as like a productivity tool. And that's been a pretty big shift that has, I think, aligned all these three different teams on the central idea of securing secrets at scale. Developers are really only going to use tools that make them more productive. We kind of have this theme in Doppler of like, make vegetables taste like candy, right? And so if you treat a secrets management as a productivity tool, then you'll get all the benefits of that at scale because developers are naturally going to want to use it. And then from a DevOps perspective, we basically allow you to sync your secrets across all your infrastructure. And that, again, is now all happening in a secure environment in a secure way, so that secrets don't accidentally get breached, leading to like the security goals of those security teams. And so that's, I'd say, one of the biggest shifts. Nick, what have you seen as well?
Yeah, just to echo that, something we take super seriously internally to the engineering organization at Doppler is, it's whether it relates to our product or products that we use. If it's not easy for developers, like developers, they're smart people. They'll work around it, right? They want to get their job done, and if you stand in their way, we're gonna work around you. So they'll find a way. I won't give any specific examples of tools that we've had to work around, but let's say it's happened within Doppler, and it indicates that there's a problem. So when we're building a product, we want to provide value to the developer. It needs to be better than net neutral, right? It can't just be easy enough where it's not a pain. It should be useful to the developer. And usually that means getting secrets to where you use them. So Brian actually headed up the project to ship an extension for VS Code in some spare time. That's an example of like delivering features to where developers need them.
Yeah.
We've also got a like TUI interface, like a command line graphical interface for users who are deeply embedded in Vim. I'm one of those people, or Emacs if you prefer. We don't judge.
Yeah. We don't need to.
We don't need to get into it, but
preference.
Yeah. But yeah, if you live in the terminal and you want to access secrets, you shouldn't have to leave that spot if you want to access secrets. So that's been our mentality: is deliver secrets to where they are, and then you'll unlock some value for the developer.
Okay. And I got to ask though, y'all, really, I mean, coming from a development background, we've all heard stories, right? A secret is not a secret if two or more people know it and can get to it. So I was really intrigued by this idea of what a secretless world really means. Like, what are we driving at?
Yeah, there's this notion in the term that we use in the security space sometimes is a portable secret, as in you can take it with you, right? And portable secrets are generally bad news, right? Because you generate a service account for your workload, right? We got a worker process that's going to handle some jobs from the queue, and you set up a service account for your worker to use, and you generate an API key for that service account. You slap that thing onto your workload, and off it goes, right? Well, the problem is that key it's not necessarily attached to that identity, right? If you manage to extract that API key, well, anybody can act as the worker job service account because it's portable. There's no restriction on where it can be used or how. So the dirty word is a portable secret, right? You really don't, you want to avoid that as much as you can. And there's ways to lock that down, but moving to a secretless world means associating authentication with an identity rather than something that you have, right? Sort of like the something that you are versus something that you have. And there's a number of ways to do that, but they all sort of hinge on having some authority that can authenticate your workload, right? So Kubernetes, for example, will issue a token that's cryptographically signed and can hand it to a workload and say, yeah, you are this thing, I can guarantee it, right? There's similar open standards like OIDC that will allow for this, but it all really boils down to the same thing, which is how do we lock in the identity of this thing? And that way, when the service is verifying who you are, they've got an association rather than just something that you showed up and presented.
Okay. Why is it so beneficial though? Like if I'm an organization moving towards this idea of what we're going to call secretless world, what are like the big benefits that I get?
Yeah, a couple of big ones that come to mind, not to capitalize on the whole thing. Please feel free to hop in, Hamza and Brian.
We'll let Hamza and Brian jump in here in a minute, but you're on a roll, man.
They're kind of auto-rotating, depending on the implementation, right? For something like a cryptographically signed, like a PKI-based system, when your workload is running, it's going to get an ephemeral token that's only good for a small, like at the runtime of the job, or it gets renewed somehow. And the benefit there is there's nothing to rotate, right? You've got a credential that you can bear, and then on the other end, it's going to trust that. And so if you manage to log the token that you were issued, for example, it's only going to be useful for a short window of time. By the time that gets logged out and it shows up somewhere where you don't want someone to see it, it will have gotten invalidated. And it's sort of automatically rotated over time. So there's no need to rotate the secret. It's just an identity, and you have to prove it over time. That's sort of the largest benefit.
Okay. And we can switch gears, Hamza and Brian, from y'all's perspective. Like whenever we understand what it means, what the benefits are, but you mentioned something I want to dig into, like this idea of rotation, like dynamic credentials. How does that differ from normal credentials? And why is credential rotation so important?
Yeah, I think, Brian, I can take this, but I think this all goes into the theme of what we're talking about. And Nick mentioned of having something that's a world that's secretless. And so traditionally, you've seen static credentials that grant you access to some specific resource. And you have the same credential that you can continue to use to get access to that resource. And the goal of all of this, whether that's going to a secretless world or going towards dynamic rotated secrets, is to reduce the potential risk of compromise or reducing the attack surface for these credentials. And so in the case of rotation, what you're doing is you're changing as much as you can to reduce the risk of compromise. So if you're changing the secret every 30 days, let's say, you have a lesser chance of someone who's gotten access to that credential to be able to use it. And dynamic secrets actually takes that a step further, where you don't have static credentials at all. Whenever you need to get access to some of the resource, you can generate that credential ephemerally. So that credential only exists as long as you need to use it. And as long as you've used it, that credential no longer exists, right? So you never have that secret. So again, going back into that secretless world, you need access to some resource, you generate that secret, and then it doesn't exist after.
Okay.
And I think
short lifetime. I like that. Cool.
One other thing that's worth, I think, mentioning here is that we're seeing a pretty big parallel with what we're talking about in the secretless world and like regular passwords that you'd use to like sign into like Facebook or Netflix. Like, for example, you guys have like, if you're ever signing into Netflix, you'll have like a username and a password, an email address and a password, right? And now we're starting to see like passkey pop up where they're like, hey, scan your face or do this Touch ID thing, and now get you into Netflix without ever needing to put your password in.
Right.
And so like in that case, right, it's not like your Touch ID can automatically get stolen or has the potential of getting stolen, right? Someone needs your physical fingerprint. And I think
we don't want to get into that talk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that'd be a scary talk of something. But that same type of thing is happening in secrets, where it's like, hey, there isn't this like static credential that could get breached, and then malicious actors can do something dangerous with it. We're working purely off of an identity that's cryptographically enforced.
Huh. And do some organizations believe that there's no benefit here? Like, is there pushback to this?
Yeah, so just talking from the lens of the customer, there's definitely always pushback when you're talking about a shift in paradigm. So you have old legacy organizations, which in some cases might even have a good point, where the operational burden of introducing something like rotation for them might not make sense compared to the potential security risk, right? So there's a lot to do in terms of education and letting people know that, hey, this is why it's important. This is why it actually makes sense from an operational perspective to spend the time to prevent future problems, right? You don't want a situation where you become reactive, and that's typically what we see. We see customers coming to us and saying, hey, we had this breach and now we're looking to implement rotation and take care of all of these things. So it's kind of an educational problem that we need to fix.
Yeah, and that's a hard one. I get it. I mean, working in a business, the idea of introducing a bunch of risk and maybe moving releases or not, getting something out on time, you weigh that with, oh, well, we've never had an issue before. But then when you do, yeah, I get it. So yeah, proactive, always better for those of you out there. We'll push on that a little bit. So when you talk about adoption rates with me for just a second, like how widespread is rotation, dynamic credentials? Is it taken over? Is it growing? Or do you see that there's some things in the way other than this proactive versus reactive thing that we need to get through to people out there listening right now to help them make that decision and make the leap?
Yeah, it's probably hard to say on like how widespread it is. I think at any organization, you're going to have a mix of some static credentials, some OIDC or identity auth, secretless, and then some that are rotated, some that are not, maybe some dynamics in there. It's really about the vendor, because I can make the commitment as an organization, as a leader, to say, hey, we're going to go fully secretless. Well, too bad, Stripe doesn't have that support, right? I'm picking on them. I don't know if they have it or not. But if they don't support identity auth, then well, that's too bad, right? Like that's a factor, is whether or not your systems or the things that you want to integrate with support it. So, and then also, what's the value of it, right? So maybe for something like your email provider, well, anything's probably got a security angle if you think about it, but you might decide as an organization that you really want to protect the identities associated with your deployment service accounts, for example, because someone has access to the service account that can deploy on your behalf for AWS. They could impersonate your service, potentially, inject a vulnerability or stand up a service that looks like yours, but it's actually sending this, all that data someplace else. So you decide like that's mission critical. So we're going to focus on shoring up that as much as we can. And then we'll kind of trickle down into like, well, database password being a static credential, maybe that's not the end of the world, for the fact that you need to be in our VPC in order to talk to the database in the first place. So maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze there. So that's the conversation that's happening inside of engineering orgs right now, I think, is, hey, of all the security initiatives that we have, which ones are providing us the most value? And is secret something we want to invest in? And which secrets do we want to invest in? But we are seeing, at least on the vendor side, more and more support for it, which is a good indicator that the market wants it.
Yeah, and that gets right back into what you were talking at the beginning. Developers want things that are high value, make their jobs easier, that really provide real security, that's not a pain in the rear end, right? And we said it before, integration is a big thing. Like, how does it fit into my current ecosystem and my current workflow? So that's kind of awesome. I do want to move into identity-based authentication. Ryan, move us along a little bit. And as I do want to fire a poll off for all of you out there attending. Like, has your business started using identity-based authentication? Yes or no? We'll give you all a minute or two to answer that. But I think as we talked through this, it's given everyone a lot of things to consider, really, when adopting something new like dynamic credentials, rotation. So as we get into this identity-based authentication and how it fits into the whole secretless idea, what are some of the things that we should be aware of? Like you mentioned before, OpenID Connect, right? So first of all, we may have people who don't know what that is. So why don't you tell us what that is? Nick?
Yeah, let's talk about what we do today and what's different here. So we're talking about this like service account with AWS, right? Or whatever provider you please. I'll pick on AWS, right? So you can generate a static secret for that service account, a key that can effectively grant you access to be the service account, right? And all you got to do is generate that thing, stick it in a secrets manager, right, and deploy with it. And now that workload can become that account, right? We've already said, there are some downsides to that. If you misplace or leak that, static secret, it's got full access to do everything that your workload's doing. So rotation, it provides some insulation there. The next level is using OIDC or something like it, effectively allows a trusted authority, in this case AWS, to be issuing either a cryptographically signed or otherwise verifiable identity to the workload. So you would say, okay, every time we spin up one of these worker things, AWS is going to sign it and say, yep, this is a worker running in this project, so on and so forth. And then on your third-party provider, right, when it goes to access Stripe or something, you'd set up a rule that says, well, if anybody comes up and says that I'm in this AWS project and has this name and that's been verified by AWS, then allow them to do these things, right? So there's kind of two pieces to set up. One piece is you need to make sure that the signing authority, like AWS, is actually issuing these things and that your workload can access them and use them. And then the other half of it is setting up the roles on the provider side that say, yeah, I've got this, API key or whatever in Stripe, and then hook it up so that there's a trust relationship between Stripe and AWS, a mutual agreement that says, yes, this account in AWS lines up with this account in Stripe. Let anybody through who matches these parameters, right? Okay. And this is kind of it in a nutshell. Different organizations have a harder or easier time with this, and I think we think that the secret's going to lie in how easy is it to set one of these things up, right? Yeah. Because right now, if you're thrashing around at this for a while, I mean, so you got to ship a big feature, or you're rolling out something new. I know pretty well how this portable secret thing is going to go. So there's this appetite to go, okay, well, why don't we just set it up real quick using the API key, and then we'll circle back at some point in the future and de-risk ourselves with identity auth, right? Well, if it was so easy to do identity auth from the get-go, you wouldn't even bother setting it up. It's like, it kind of reminds me of like the HTTP versus HTTPS days. Now it's just so easy to get a certificate with Let's Encrypt that there's just no reason not to do it, right? And that ease has unlocked like a whole bunch of security for the internet, because it's like, well, don't you're going to just send it unencrypted. Oh, it's so easy. Why wouldn't you just?
Why would you not?
Hit the extra step, yeah. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now. Is there's a secure thing to do, but gosh, is it worth it? I've got a deadline I got to meet. We got to ship this thing. Let's circle back later. And what we're really seeing is security decisions are sticky. Infrastructure decisions are sticky. So when you make the commitment to use a portable credential, Well, what's the sell of like, hey, let's circle back and improve it? Like for what? For like this sort of abstract idea of risk. Humans are really bad at estimating risk, right? So it's like, unless I get something tangible, like what do we get a speed up? Like what do we get if we don't use a portable API key? It's just like, I don't know, man. Like why don't we work on something else? And like that's a bad decision. That's a real squeeze to put your users in, right? Where they have to choose between the speed of their implementation and being secure. That's recipe for disaster.
And it's hard. I mean, from a product management perspective, they're going to ask, well, what's the value and what's the trade-off and what's the time? And I get it. And Brian, from your perspective, or we're going to call you a resident executive if we can, we want to hear your perspective at a little bit higher level, because it seems like, given the complexities, challenges, and everything that we've discussed around identity-based authentication, that Doppler may actually fit into this world somewhere, right? So based on what I know, I think that's true. And if it is, how do y'all fit in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it really comes back to like this underlying thing I was talking about earlier of making vegetables taste like candy, right? What you really want is you want the most secure thing possible to be the most productive thing possible. And so you kind of like remove the choice from the developer, right? They shouldn't have to choose, do I do a secure thing that takes 10x longer, or do I do an insecure thing or less secure thing that's really, really quick, right? You should make it that the most secure thing you can do takes 1 second flat, and they don't need to think about that. And so I'll take a second and like paint a picture of what this world could look like. I think if we fast forward maybe a year to 2 years with Doppler working with vendors to make sure we can actually do this rollout, where you're in an AWS cluster, like a Kubernetes cluster, and you're authenticated. And because you're in that cluster, or your code is executing in that cluster, it can automatically authenticate to Doppler. We have an identity connection set up where if you're in this cluster, you now automatically authenticate to Doppler. And then separately to that, Doppler is now connected with Stripe. It's connected with Twilio. It's connected with your database. It's connected with all the different services and vendors you use. And so just by the fact that you're in that cluster, you're now automatically authenticated into all the services you need. And it makes it really easy to spin things up and down too, right? Like you spin up a new cluster, you set up the authentication just to Doppler, and now you're authenticated to Stripe and all your other vendors. And it also means that it's far more secure. And so when I think about it from an executive, that's really the goal that we're trying to enable for our customers and their executives, is to basically make the most secure option possible, also be the most productive option, so that there isn't really a choice for developers anymore. The choice is like just such an overly obvious one. And I also believe that if you just remove these static credentials, that you're like removing a thing to think about, right? And like one big way that you can speed up developers is you remove the overhead of choice and remove the overhead of things that they have to put in the back of their mind of thinking about, like, oh, if I have this thing, now I have to maybe rotate it. Maybe now I have to figure out how to get this to all the other engineers on my team, or get this into production. And does this thing get into production faster than the code? Because if the code gets there faster, well, now all of a sudden I have an outage. And so like, if you can remove all of that complexity away and just make it as simple as like, yep, if I do this, I know I'm right, and it's going to work magically the way I want it to, which that would be the goal of a system like this. That's the kind of world we're trying to run towards. And it requires both our customers and potential customers speaking and saying, I want this, right? And then also us relaying that to the vendors that we work with to make sure that we can actually build this identity network.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a good vision. Now I understand the whole making my veggies taste like candy, right? Because you eliminate the need for people to say it's too hard to implement, it doesn't integrate, all the things that we've been talking about. So that's a pretty cool vision, Brian. I like that. Do y'all have anything else to share, Nick, Hamza?
I think Brian nailed it. It's about making it easy.
It's your last chance
making
to get into AI, man. Because once we go there, man, we don't go back. But yeah, I do want to take a little bit of time here. I know, we've got around 10 minutes, but AI is just taking over everything. We can't get over that, right? New challenges, opportunities, especially around cybersecurity. So I want to look a little bit at that in context here, right? So what are some of the key ways that AI is contributing, both good or bad, to the space?
I can maybe jump in and take the first crack at this. I also know that we a pretty diverse set of opinions on our team. So this is probably one of the
this
areas
might
where
get
we
good
actually
then.
get some really good debate. But I think like if we take a fundamental step back, like the goal of any attacker is to basically find the weak link. Like there's a different set of responsibilities between someone who's trying to like protect the castle and someone who's trying to break into the castle, right? The one who's trying to protect the castle is basically trying to find or make sure that every wall is covered and strong, right? Like there's no cracks that you can basically attack. And an attacker is the exact opposite. They're trying to find that one crack in the wall and exploit it to bring the whole thing down, right? And they'll go after whatever the weakest link is. And a lot of times, what I think is going to happen is whatever that weakest link is in your security posture, that's where AI is going to find that the fastest. Like AI is going to take what attackers are already doing, which is finding that weak link and exploiting it, and they're going to just do that far more. They're going to do it faster and more efficiently. And so just things that would never have been discovered, like 0 days, and it doesn't have to be like 0 day in a framework, but it could be 0 day in your security posture, for example. They will find that, and they will find it substantially faster than an AI attacker would. And so that means you really have to have your game up. You have to protect all the different parts of the castle. Every single wall needs. And if it's secrets that you're weak on, then secrets are the things that are going to get exploited. If it's email, then it may be that. But it really means that as a protector, you really have to have your game up very strong, because there's a large set of attackers now. Like if you think about like hackers, there may be a team of like 5 people or 10 people, or even a really big team of 20 people. But now when you're in the world of like AI, they can spin up maybe 100,000 to 1 million different AI hackers that are all trying to break one target.
Yeah.
Right. And so now how do you compete against that?
Oh, I feel like he was throwing that at Nick or Hamza. One of y'all better jump in. And he said he wants some debate. So yeah, get after it.
No, so I think
go ahead.
I was just gonna talking to Brian's point. I think when you're looking at AI, obviously there's both positives and negatives. I personally think the real danger is where you have the weakest link within any system is unfortunately humans, right? Like whenever we see these kind of breaches, most of the time it's not like some computers breaking encryption or you didn't have a strong enough API key. The problem is usually someone had some sensitive credentials somewhere in a repository they shouldn't have had, or someone fell to a phishing attempt. And I think especially with the advancements we've had in AI, they've been around natural language and computers being really good at creating language that is very similar to humans. And at the scale that Brian mentioned, that's something that I personally think is the most dangerous, where you have at scale communication to people in companies with tens of thousands of employees, and all you need is one person to fall victim to a potential phishing attempt, as these AI systems are getting so good at replicating humans. So I think that's definitely one of the potential cons, but I'll let Nick talk to some of the benefits as well.
I was going to harp on the cons with you, man. I'm in agreement. I think the social engineering aspect of this is the biggest risk, right? Like I get tons of messages on my phone from Brian, who needs gift cards, and it's pretty easy to tell when he signs his text like "all the best, Brian," that like it's not him. But like Brian does a lot of speaking events, and there's a lot of Brian words out on the internet, and a lot of clips of his voice to train. Like once there's enough incentive behind that, someone might be able to send me a pretty convincing video of Brian asking for gift cards, or worse.
which in and of itself is a red flag, Nick.
I hope that Brian never legitimately needs me to buy him gift cards, because it's never going to happen. I'm going to be like, nope. And you're like, no. Remember that time we went to this place? We talked about this. No one else would possibly know about that. Oh no. This is a deep fake.
It doesn't matter.
Those are the big risks. Is like historically we've seen attacks that are either widespread and less sophisticated, or sophistication's it's got multiple dimensions, but less depth, I'll say, and more breadth. Like let's just kind of spray and pray and see what sticks. It's easy to get a list of every Doppler employee's email address, right? And just hit them all with a text, see what happens. And then there's like the like spear phishing kind of thing, where we're going to like really zoom into one individual and try to exploit, with how they see the world or whatever. And now they can do both, right? Now there's enough, innovation behind this where we can do deep attacks on a big group of people. And there's a lot of risk there.
What do we do, y'all? Like I'm all of a sudden, I'm like, what do we do? Like, and, I run an organization. It's interesting. We do, to Hamza's point, we do this thing called Secure the Human, right? So that's, it's just security training. I think that's one way to do it. I think we talked a little bit about the whole idea of using a tool like yours to do the rotation and dynamics and keep that stuff out of the way. But I mean, it's getting a lot harder, right? Gone are the days when there's a prince on the other side that just needs, a few $1,000s to make it over, and then he'll bring gold. I mean, it keeps getting more sophisticated. So I think our tools, as they do that. But the other thing is, like, the reducing the risk, I think that's one of them. But is there any silver lining? Like, how does the integration of AI act as a forcing function for companies in general? Does that help y'all, right, to some of the issues that we said before, with being reactive and that kind of stuff? Do you think that's making a difference?
Yeah, I think we are seeing, the common sense protections against these kinds of things, which are granting least privilege access, compartmentalizing your systems, defense in depth, as providing extra safeguards around this. And I do think it will be a forcing function for folks who have been maybe getting away with being a little bit more relaxed about access controls and things like that.
Yeah.
But like, as an example, employees at Doppler have the least access that they need to do their job. We don't grant more access than is necessary. That's not a lack of trust. It's a numbers game, right? Like that's just more credentials that could be used to abuse the system.
Mm-hmm.
So once we see more and more sophistication around these attacks, I think the broader industry will need to level up and provide least access and things like break glass, to make sure that, okay, if you do need access to this, you're only going to get it for a short amount of time, and everything you do in that amount of time is going to be audited, and like, it's you need to do your job, but we're also going to give you a very small amount of space to handle highly sensitive information. But this idea of like, you can't leak what you can't see, right? We've added support for restricted secrets, which are secrets that are you can't read them unless you're a machine identity, and that's, I think, like a big way to protect users is like, when we even say this internally, like, I don't want that secret. Like, we want one person to do this, not in a screen share, right? And never see it, never touch it. It would be even better if we could exchange that secret without anyone touching it. Even better if it wasn't a secret at all, right? It was identity. But yeah, as much as possible, we're, we are playing nose goes over here with who needs to see a portable secret if one is required, because I'd prefer not to, right? I'd prefer that never cross my laptop, because more touch points is more risk.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we do have some questions. So I agree. It sounded like as we got into AI, there's a forcing function to help companies move over is probably a good thing for all of us. But, we do have a question here from Scott. Thank you for writing in, Scott. Are we talking about something like Azure's Key Vault or the AWS Secrets Manager? I think, Nick, this was from when you were talking earlier.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Azure Key Vault and AWS Secrets Manager are great platform secrets systems. They're secure storage, and that's kind of how we view them at Doppler. So the general ideology is do all of your interaction with Doppler, right? You can save secrets in there, you can stratify them across your environments, and then we'll deliver them to wherever they need to go. And as it happens, AWS Secrets Manager and Key Vault are very convenient spots to store secrets if your workloads exist in those platforms, right? AWS Secrets Manager, there's a dozen guides on how to interact with AWS Secrets Manager when you're working in an EC2 instance or a Lambda. They make it very easy to do. But not all of your secrets are necessarily stored there, and they're definitely not stored there across all of your environments. So sort of our approach has said, okay, well, store everything in Doppler, sync secrets into AWS Secrets Manager or wherever is easiest for you to ingest them in your workload, and then lock down access so that nobody has access to AWS Secrets Manager. It's like a secure mailbox almost. And there's great benefits to that. There's a high availability story. I mean, we're very proud of our uptime, but there's an advantage to saying, well, if Doppler goes down, AWS Secrets Manager, they're going to be there as a cache effectively, ready for me to consume them. The latency is low, and it's secure because I know no one has access to it. So that's sort of how we think about the secrets managers that exist out in the wild right now, as well as like the platform storages, things like Vercel's environment variable, secure environment variables like Heroku and Netlify are kind of in the same plane.
Okay, cool. All right, another one, like how do we, for everybody who's out there, how do we stay up to date with the innovations in secrets management? And Brian, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think Doppler does a pretty good job to write about it. So if you go to doppler.com/blog, you can also follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. So Doppler, I think, are both the handles. And anytime there's updates either from us or we think like big industry wide, like protocol improvements and such, we'll be definitely talking about it there.
Okay, cool. How do small and medium-sized businesses implement these advanced secrets management practices? Because they're small and medium businesses, I'm assuming is the question, right? They're small. So how can they do this? I mean, it seems like everybody needs it, right? Everybody wants veggies to taste like candy, but what do we have for those smaller companies?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that's also goes hand in hand with the philosophy we have with Doppler. So we work with a lot of really small startups, work with small, medium businesses and enterprises. We actually have even a lot of college students or people who are just doing the projects using Doppler.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's the idea, where you want to make sure that managing secrets is something that you do as early as possible. You don't want to get to a point where you're a large organization, you have a lot of tech debt, you need to go back and change everything you're doing. So with Doppler specifically, we have multiple tiers, right? So it's free to use. Even if you're a one-person company, you can go and create a Doppler account at doppler.com and start using all the important functionality to actually have a secure workflow.
Okay, that's awesome. Just a couple more. Reminder, any of y'all out there, like Scott, if you have a question, throw it in there. How have successful organizations like restructured their team around this? I mean, DevOps teams, they're structured a certain way for optimal efficiency. So, but to prioritize the management of secrets, like, do we need to do org changes?
Yeah, I think I'll take this one just based on some customers I've worked with, especially at large scale. One of the important things here is Doppler is designed in a way that you don't need to make too many changes to your organization, both at the layer of actually managing secrets, but also consuming them, like Nick mentioned, right? One of the reasons we have the ability to sync these secrets to AWS or Azure or GCP is if your applications want to consume secrets from those platforms, we are not going to come in and say, hey, you need to change all your application code and start fetching secrets from Doppler. Similarly, at the management layer as well, Doppler connects with your IDPs like Azure AD or Okta. And so you can map your existing groups into Doppler directly using something like SCIM. So the idea is to have minimal friction if you're choosing to adopt a tool like Doppler.
Yeah, that's super important. I mean, that was one of the things I was thinking about as we go through this too. A lot of times people want to know, what does it take? Sometimes you need people and you don't. That's awesome. Makes it more available for people. Kind of the last one before we start to wrap up, unless anybody has any other questions, how do organizations balance, and this is getting back to dynamic credential rotation, it looks like, balance the cost and effort of doing dynamic credential rotation with the benefits? Right. So this is getting back to that beginning question that we had on rotation.
Yeah, this is a sort of a philosophical question, right? Something to be wrestled with is, okay. There's risk associated with having credentials. The longer they live, the more risk you have. So the pragmatic way to do it is probably not to take a hard line approach and say, hey, we're gonna overhaul everything. Let's take 6 months and let's make every credential a dynamic one or identity auth, but probably to focus on the high impact ones first, right? I mentioned deploy keys. Like, wow, it would be really, really bad if we leaked these. Anything related to collecting money from users, your Stripe keys, things like that. Your SendGrid keys are probably going to be used to send verification emails and sensitive data like that could be abused, right? So any of these things that you think are particularly high value, working your way down into your analytics tools and things like that, where someone could send bogus data to us, and how much do we care about that? Right. But there is a cost associated with implementing these things. And really what we're trying to do is bring that down so that it's hey, gosh, I wish I could just spend some money and have this taken care of, right? Because that's really how things are going to get done is, hey, this is easy to do. Let's just use this tool and be done with it.
Well, speaking of that, we do, for those of you who have hung in there and you're still with us, we're so thankful. But Doppler's got a deal for you. So it looks like we've got a 20% off a team plan. So if you want to give it a shot, get out there, another lowering the cost of entry to get those veggies tasting like candy. And check one more time on Q&A. Okay, we don't have any more. So awesome conversation, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us. Doppler in general, sponsoring this thing, it's super important topic. I think everybody needs to understand so that we can have a better security posture all over for everything, right? I mean, we touched base on social engineering, people using AI to hack. You know, we know the things that we should do with dynamic credentials, credential rotation, and we've lowered the cost of entry. So that barrier is not as high for you to get over. So thank you for attending. We really hope that you enjoyed your time with us. A special thank you to Brian, Nick, and Hamza for sharing your insights and expertise with us. If you enjoyed our chat and want to see more events like this, head on over to dzone.com/events for more content. And please stay on for just one more minute. We'd love to get your feedback on our session. We're always looking to improve. Thank you again for spending time with us today. See you next time. Until then, keep innovating and stay secure.